In a previous video, we talked about operating in an uncontrolled airport, the need to communicate, to let people know what you're doing, and also to be monitoring the frequency to be aware of what others are doing. Might be a little bit of a mystery to hear some of the communication if we don't understand what runway numbers mean, or how do they come up with runway numbers, what does that mean? So you see the little picture of the compass rose, those are heading numbers, right? And they're 3 digits, right? There's 360 degrees. If you're pointing your aircraft, or you're heading your aircraft towards the north, we would call it on a heading of 360. If we were heading south, we would call it a heading of 180. If we're heading west, it'd be a heading at 270. And if we're heading east, it'd be a heading of 90 degrees. Runway numbers are based off magnetic. If you don't know the difference between magnetic and true north, you need to read again the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, go through chapter 16. It's not extremely important for drone pilots to know, but there may be a time when you have a fixed wing drone that might fly longer distances. That's in the future. Right now it's not that important, but if you're going to move on and get your private pilot license, it will be important. So you might want to read that chapter. Okay, so runways are named after the magnetic direction that they're aimed at. Okay, so here's a runway here. It's aimed at 360. We don't call it a runway 360 or 360 degrees. We just call it runway 36. So that's the direction you're aiming when you're taking off on the runway. If you're going to go take off on this runway, it's heading 180, but we just abbreviate and say it's runway 18. Does that make sense? Okay. So in our particular case, we don't always want to refer to the local case because you'll be operating at other airports, but if you were operating in Griffin, the runway goes this way here. It goes on a heading of sort of northwest, roughly, but specifically it's runway 32. It's 320 degrees. You're sitting on the runway, then roughly 3. Now they round that number back and forth because it might be 322 degrees B. And the reciprocal of that, what I mean by reciprocal is that 180 degrees opposite direction is runway 14. So if the person called on the radio and you're operating in the area with your drone, and he or she calls up on the radio and says, Griffin traffic, Cessna 428, departing runway 14, or taking the active, or taking off on runway 14, going to remain in the traffic pattern, then you would know that's where they were and they're going to take off like this. And since all traffic patterns, standard traffic patterns, are left-hand turns, he or she would be climbing up and they'd make a left turn. This would be crosswind. That's the name of the leg. And then they said they're going to keep in the pattern. They're going to keep doing touch and go. So they'd go crosswind for a ways. They'd be climbing up, and then they'd turn another turn. And this would be called downwind. That's the downwind leg. And then they get over here and they'd turn base leg. And then they get lined up and they make the turn for final approach. And they do this over and over again. So you would know if you're over in this area here, like this would be sort of downtown over here, you'd want to be paying attention because he'd be flying over the top of you, hopefully, unless he has some kind of issue, or if he's a helicopter, helicopters fly lower. But still, there's our traffic pattern altitudes, which are above drone altitudes. But still, want to be aware of that. We've talked about that before. So that's the normal pattern for runway, and I should put an arrow there just to help you. This is the direction we're going in. They're going in that direction to do the traffic pattern here. So if somebody called Griffin traffic, Cessna 428, downwind leg, runway 14, you would instantly know that they're over here. You ought to instantly know. And there are questions on the FAA knowledge exam asking that question. Not this particular scenario, but asking that question. All right, so we got that. And I don't want to make this into a long video, but okay, so now if he's taking off this way, if he calls and says, hey, Griffin traffic, Cessna 428, taking off runway 32, going to rain the pattern to do some touch and goes, you would know he's going to be taking off this way, upwind, crosswind, downwind, base, final. Hey, you're over here, no problem. You don't have to worry about it too much. You still want to make an announcement saying where you are in case he decides to do something weird, but this is what he's doing. He's making these approaches, he takes off, he goes this way, he goes around and around and around. Now, he may say, which is maybe more likely, I don't know, who knows. He may say, or she may say, hey, Griffin traffic, runway Cessna 428, departing runway 32, going to make a right turn out heading east. Okay, well, he's doing something a little bit non-standard because he takes off here, he starts climbing up there, he makes this right turn as he's climbing up, and then he heads to the east. That's east, 090, east. Right? So we know his intentions. Likely he'll be climbing because he's going to go over the top of Griffin. Let's hope he continues to climb. But those are the kind of things that you'll be able to listen to and sort of orient yourself to where he or she might be, where the manned aircraft might be. Remember, the big policy here is we don't want to scare them. We don't want to make them think that we are too close to them. So we want to avoid it. We're not supposed to interfere with their traffic. But that's the idea behind the runway numbers.